All right, here is the recording that I'm making of the presentation that I gave a week and a half ago about our trip to Japan. I had hoped to record the actual giving of me doing it, and it just didn't work quite like I wanted it to. So I'm re-recording, going through the slideshow. So you'll see all the same slides, and you'll hear me talk about it. And I probably won't say exactly the same things that I said then, but that's okay. Hopefully this gives you an idea. So this is our Japan trip. This was a picture we took. We're sitting here in front of the Shimabara Castle, which is a reconstructed castle. The castle was built in the early 1600s actually, and was rebuilt, I think, in the 1960s, if I remember right. It had been actually was destroyed and damaged due to seismic earthquake volcano activity. A lot of that in Japan, but this is a rebuilt in the 1960s to be authentic to what it was like. Although I'm sure the construction methods are a lot different. So there we are sitting in front. Now you see they had this little photograph taking station. You set your phone on a thing. It was very hot, I remember. So we were sitting in the sun as little as possible. I think it was probably 90, mid to high 90s, as I recall. So we did not like to be in the sun, and it was very humid. But this is the date here. So this is the date in the Japanese system. So the 7 is actually the year. So 2025 is, if I remember right, that's Reiwa, which is the current emperor's reign, basically the era of the current emperor. So it's the 7th year of the current emperor, which is 2025. And it's August 16th when we took that picture. So that's what you're seeing there. So a little bit about the size of Japan, about what Japan looks like. I think that's helpful because it's hard to imagine exactly, how big a place is. And so I thought overlaying it on something we were maybe more familiar with. So this is Japan. If you just took Japan and you put it over the US, this is what it would look like. This is the size it would be. So it would extend, as I put it here. Nagasaki, where we were, would be right. If I put that on San Francisco, then Tokyo would be right around Salt Lake City. So there's a distance there, I want to say 600 miles or something like that. And then, of course, that's about the midpoint of Japan, and it goes much further north. So we'd be up into Canada here in this area. If you flipped it around, you can kind of think of it as the West Coast. It lines up pretty well with the West Coast. So you see north from Japan's perspective is this way. So I've rotated it around for this. Yeah, so you can see like basically the distance we traveled was, from this Northern California up to, well, Nagasaki would be about right where we are now, in fact. So maybe Bellingham. So just a sense of the size of Japan. So Japan's very coastal. You can think of it as the west and east coast of the United States kind of just squished together without a lot of distance between them. A lot of interaction with the sea there. Here's another map of it. So kind of the geography of Japan. There's thousands of islands that make up Japan, but there's four major islands, four main islands. You've got Hokkaido in the north, which is its own island up here. You've got the main island, the long island, which is Honshu. That's where Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka, Hiroshima, many of the major cities of Japan are on Honshu. Then you have Shikoku. We didn't go to Shikoku. We didn't go to Hokkaido either, but we didn't go to Shikoku, but we took a train near it. If we knew what we were looking at, possibly we could have seen it if we were looking out the window at the right time. And then at the end here on the west is Kyushu, which is where we spent almost all of our time on this island on the western end, and Nagasaki right about there. All right, so this is a little bit of just to get a sense of where we were. So you've seen what Japan size of it and so on. We started out, we flew out of Vancouver. So our first international crossing was just driving across the border into Canada about, I don't know, an hour after we left home, something like that. And we flew out early in the morning from Vancouver, and we flew way across the ocean, all the way to Japan, kind of along the coast of Alaska, and it landed in Tokyo, or actually kind of outside, a little bit to the east of Tokyo, at one of the Tokyo airports. And we took a train into Tokyo from there. Went to Tokyo Station, which was very, very busy. And by the way, for sizes, you can see there's a map scale here. So we landed, the airport's actually about 30 miles out of Tokyo, somewhere this area. And then we took a high-speed train down the coast of Japan, all the way down along Honshu, and kind of along the southern coast here. We stayed the first night in Fukuoka. We weren't there very long. We got in after dark and we left not long after sunrise the next morning to take a train down south. So we're on Kyushu at this point, that other western island, down into Nagasaki. So Nagasaki, we stayed for 3 days. I think we had 2 nights there. And some of the things we saw, the 26 Martyrs Monument, you can see right here, kind of near downtown, the main station, Nagasaki Station's right there. We stayed up here on this side. That's the Atomic Bomb Hypocenter. So we went to the museum and the park around that. There'll be pictures of all this later, but those are the things we did there. Um, this is also where we saw the big parade festival, the Shoryo Nagashi, the spirit boat procession, which was kind of winding through this part of Nagasaki. So after a few days in Nagasaki, we took a train to the east to this peninsula, which is called the Shimabara Peninsula. And so we took all the way around, kind of actually around this. This is a big mountain, or it's kind of a group of mountains here in the middle known as Unzen. And we stayed in the town of Shimabara, right near Shimabara Castle, there in the northeast part of the peninsula, as you can see, as we zoom in on it here. Yeah, so we had a great view of Shimabara Castle, which was the picture on the first slide there of us sitting in front of Shimabara Castle. From there, we did day trips. So we did a day trip down to Minami Shimabara, which means South Shimabara in Japanese. There we saw the Hara Castle ruins, which are what remains of where the last ending siege of the Shimabara Rebellion happened, or the Amakusa Shimabara Uprising, which was in the 1630s. I think 1637 off the top of my head, if I'm remembering right. I have slides about that later, so we'll see more about that. Also, the Arima Christian Heritage Museum, which was largely dedicated to the daimyo, the feudal lord of this region, Arima, who was the family converted to Christianity very early. I think mostly for political reasons, but the person that this museum is mostly dedicated to was the son of the one who did that mostly for economic reasons, really increased trade with Europeans in the 1500s, and seemed to take it seriously. So there's a museum kind of dedicated to him that we visited while we were there. We also did a day trip up the mountain to Unzen. Unzen Onsen is the name of the town. It's really a resort town. The hot springs there. There's one of the sites we visited there. The main site was the Unzen Hell, or Unzen Jigoku in Japanese. The hells, the Jigoku, are these hot springs steaming and bubbling, boiling, very sulfur smelling. At least here they're called Jigokus. That might just be what they're called elsewhere in Japan too. I'm not sure. They're called hells because they're reminiscent of, I think, a Buddhist idea of what an underworld hell might be like. It also was a site of Christian martyrdom, so we visited the Christian martyrdom monument while we were there. Again, we'll have pictures of all this, or I have pictures of all this later on in the presentation. After we were done on the Shimabara Peninsula, we made our way back towards Tokyo. We took a ferry across from Shimabara to Kumamoto, which Kumamoto is a much larger city, I think over 1 million people. And then we took a high-speed train from Kumamoto up about halfway back to Tokyo, all the way up to Hiroshima. So kind of back along the route that we came down there. We stayed in Hiroshima, actually very near where the atomic bomb dome is. There'll be pictures of that. So the hypocenter, the place where the bomb was dropped, is right about there. It was actually like the other corner of the block where the place that we stayed was. There was the little small monument to the hypocenter. The main memorial monument is not quite where the hypocenter is, but it's probably the most iconic is this atomic bomb dome, which is the remains of a building that were left up as a memorial. But yeah, so that's basically where we were on the trip. So just to kind of zoom out, get a sense of the scale. So, we flew in here. Kind of the big tourist spots are, Tokyo, Osaka, Kyoto's down in this area too. But we were entirely down on Kyushu, and really in Nagasaki Prefecture pretty much, except for our night in Hiroshima. So that's where that took us. There's a picture of Krista and I in the airport. This is our first getting on our first train, actually. So you can see where it says Skyliner there behind on the train right there. And that's the Skyliner takes you from the airport to, well, we took it to Tokyo Station, although it could have taken it to others. Off, ready to go. Here's a picture of one of the bullet trains that we took, the Shinkansen, which is the name for high-speed train basically in Japan. And you can see how long and elongated the nose is on this. It's very streamlined because it has to go very fast, especially going in and out of tunnels. I guess there's air pressure problems otherwise. I did take a video of what it was like to be on it, just to get a sense of it. Let's see if this plays here. Oh, I have to click it to make it go. Oh, there it goes. You can see it. Things aren't actually tilted. It's just because it's moving so fast, the camera makes it look tilted. At one point we go into a tunnel and it just goes, yep. It's honestly a lot like riding an airplane, but on the ground. It made everything feel kind of small, but you see, like even here, actually, you can see just how hilly and overgrown with trees and forest it is. There's for the size of Japan, there's not a lot of nice, level, easily traversed land there. And they get a lot of rain. They get something like 2 to 3 times the amount of rain, at least in Nagasaki, I remember looking up, 2 to 3 times the amount of rain that we get here. So things just grow like crazy there. There's just everything is very green and lush. Here's some more pictures as we're going by. So I made sure to get some pictures of farmland we were going by because I knew, we've got farmers who'll be interested to see these things. This is a picture. I don't even remember what town this was in now, but you can see a road bridge going, bridging the gaps there. Oh, did I do that twice? I had that one twice, apparently. I don't actually know what that monument was. I saw it and took a picture, but I don't even remember. I wasn't even sure exactly where we were, but I think probably maybe a Buddhist temple or something, but I don't know for sure. Here's some more pictures. I'm not sure what crops are being grown there. I think that might, I don't know here. We saw several rice fields. You'll see some coming up. This is actually in Nagasaki. This is actually at the Peace Park, where for the atomic bomb memorial. So we're kind of above the museum, kind of on top of it actually at this point, but not very hilly even in Nagasaki, as you can see. This is rice here. You can see it's growing in the water. So they've got the fields are just submerged. That's the ferry we took from Shimabara to Kumamoto, the high-speed ferry. Even this ferry was high-speed. Went about the same distance, I think. It's pretty comparable to like Anacortes to Friday Harbor, but it only did it about half the time. It was definitely a faster ferry. There was a slower one we could have taken, but why do that when we don't have to? Here's another picture of this is actually where we stayed in Hiroshima. So you can see the traditional Japanese style, very low furniture with my coins. That lots of money, cash in is still a big thing in Japan, more than cards, especially when we were in the more rural spots. And a lot of the smaller things are coins. So just a lot of coins in my pocket. So anytime we got in the room, I would empty my pockets onto that. But then we can see that's the atomic bomb dome there. So that's the right at the north end of the Hiroshima Peace Park. And so, it was a great view. It was actually one of my favorite places that we stayed. So I want to talk a little bit about religion in Japan. And because, a big part of why I wanted to go there was to get a sense of the history of Christianity in Japan, but also how does that interact with sort of the religious background that existed in Japan in the 1500s, and then curious too about how that has continued into the present day. And there's only so much you can know, especially we were only there about 8 days. There's only so much you can get from museums, and so I don't know a lot about the present reality of especially Christianity in Japan. What's living Christianity look like in Japan? But a lot of the museums and the historical pieces of Christianity related to these other things too. But I just want to give a sense of the backdrop, the religious backdrop in Japan, as I understand it, which is going to be pretty limited here. So know that you are by far hearing this from an expert. This is, I'm nowhere near an expert here. But this is a Shinto shrine that we're looking into. This is one of the, if I remember right, one of the sub-shrines of Suwa Shrine, which was near where we stayed in Nagasaki. And I have several pictures from there. But there's a saying about Japan, or about Japanese people, that in Japan you're born Shinto, you're married Christian, and you die Buddhist. And I'll say a little bit more about what that means, but there's not really seen to be a contradiction between that. But that's people sort of go back and forth, mostly between Buddhist and Shinto rites, rituals, holy sites, to the extent that they practice these things at all, and don't see any problems with an integration of that. Now, that's not always been the case. Sometimes there have been periods in history where there have been forced separations between Buddhism and Shintoism, for example, where usually because the one group or the other is seen as more supportive of the government tries to elevate that group that they see as being more helpful to them, and maybe putting down the group that was more supportive of the previous regime, that sort of thing. But in general, at least as Japan is today, these things just sort of overlap. They just sort of coexist. And for most people, that does not seem to be an issue. And what do we mean by born Shinto, married Christian, and die Buddhist? Well, what this is the saying is pointing to is that Shinto rituals, rites, are very common for things like birth. So there's a visit to the Shinto shrine, the part of a new birth. New Year's, there's a strong tradition of going and visiting a shrine. When buildings are built, they're often dedicated in a Shinto ceremony. Of course, there's Buddhist ceremonies for these too, but the Shinto ones are more common, as I understand it. Married Christian, that actually just refers to Western style weddings. So they're often called Christian weddings, but they're not necessarily Christian in content, if that makes sense, but they look like a Western style wedding with the white dress and tuxedos and those sorts of things. There are, of course, Buddhist and Shinto wedding rites, but the most popular, at least in recent times, is what they call a Christian wedding, really a Western wedding. So that's what married Christian means. And then die Buddhist. So the most common funeral rites are Buddhist funeral rites. Funerals will typically be held in a Buddhist setting, often at a Buddhist temple, led by a Buddhist priest. And the cemeteries are sort of by default Buddhist. The cemeteries are sort of designed in a Buddhist way, as my understanding. And so that sort of the way these religions interact across, a person's life cycle in Japan. Shinto, the first part of that. Shinto, I've got it written there. You can see in the kanji script, the Japanese script there. It literally means way of the gods. So that's what that translates it to. That's God way, basically, or gods, maybe spirits is maybe a better translation, kami. Of that word. So kami they're gods, they're supernatural spirits, so they could be anything from sort of just a little almost something like we'd think of as like a fairy or something like that in, I'm thinking like Western European traditions, to, the sun goddess Amaterasu. So there's a whole range of this. This is a religion that is native to Japan. It is a native Japanese religion. Buddhism comes into Japan from China. Christianity, to the extent that it's there, comes primarily from Europe, but kind of through some colonial intermediaries in the 1500s, and today a lot from American influence. But Shinto is Japanese. It originates in Japan. And there are different stories about the kami. So if you ever Japanese folklore is going to be kind of Shinto in nature about the various ghosts or different sort of mischievous creatures, or these spirits, these gods of particular locations or areas. And the stories differ place to place, and there's not really any real expectation that they need to be uniform. So it's not like there's one united story. It's more like different local shrines or places will have their own sort of versions of these stories, their own versions of, traditions of these various spirits that they are enshrining there. And Yeah, and so it's very diverse in that sense. Um, I'd say, best as I can understand it, it's primarily about seeking, good fortune, good luck, or protection from bad luck from the kami. So you go, you visit the shrine, and the understanding is you go and you're expressing your intentions, you're praying essentially for good luck. So there will be shrines in the home, is a common practice with maybe pictures of relatives who have died, or with other little household statues. These can be Buddhist in nature too, so it's not necessarily just a Shinto thing. Um, There'll be visits to major shrines for New Year's. That's a common tradition. At the birth of a baby, dedication ceremonies for buildings. These are all Shinto practices. Some of the Shinto sites that we saw. Oh, one of the I should have shown this on the last slide too, maybe, but you can see it here. This style of gate, it's a very Japanese style of gate. It's called a tori gate, and tori gates are kind of a symbol of Shintoism. So you are entering into a sacred place of some kind. So we took some pictures. One of our mornings in Nagasaki, there were quite a few shrines right around where we were, and so we just went and walked around and saw what we could see. And so some, like that picture of all the red torii gates, were very well maintained. Some were not as well. This is a little older looking. Um, I think this is up that same staircase, like at the top of it. You can see how overgrown this was. We had to kind of step across plants to get up there, and kind of broken down. And yet, like maybe you can see there's I think it was a bottle of some drink, water bottle of some kind. That was and a couple coins that were left there as offerings at the shrine, basically. So somebody was still visiting this place. Actually was able to take a picture inside of this shrine. You can see the inside's pretty well kept, even if the outside hasn't been maintained that well. There was one of the window panes was actually broken out, which is what I'm taking this picture through. But you see things in there look good. There's the taiko drum, which is I think used in ceremonies. I don't quite know exactly how. This is another shrine. This is the entrance to Suwa Shrine, which is a big shrine complex in Nagasaki. So like that shrine that I just showed you before this is, there was nobody attending to it. There wasn't anybody there. So we just sort of walked around and tried to be respectful, or trying to figure out what respectful was. Whereas like Suwa Shrine, this is the entrance to, had dozens of people there, working. They had concession stands, they had souvenir shop, they had all. It was all there. So there's a whole range of things. This torii gate you can see is huge. So I don't know if you've noticed, there's a person standing right there. These are big gates on the way up, and you can see several in the line as you make your way up the stairs. This is inside the main front part of Suwa Shrine here. You see the big statues, and it's just, obviously very well maintained. Right behind this horse statue here on the left was the washing station. So this is when you do a shrine visit, you're supposed to, and there's a similar practice for Buddhist temples actually too. It's slightly different, um, but you take these ladles, you dip them in the water, and you pour water over each hand. It's a way of you're purifying your hand. You take some water, you put it on your lips, purifying your lips, and then you let the ladle um, be covered in the water to repurify it and set it down. And this is a ritual washing as you approach. Actually, the sign up here is a picture of a girl with instructions in Japanese on how to do the washing. So you can see that she's washing her hands, and then that last one, she's putting her hand to her mouth. She's put water on her hand and is washing her mouth. I remember seeing a sign that was "Do not put the ladle on your mouth." Yeah, that's not what they want. Uh, Here's actually that another taiko drum there. This is inside that same shrine that I had at the opening slide, the religion in Japan slide. So this is again part of Suwa Shrine. So there's a bunch of shrines in this kind of complex, some much more grand than others. And the diversity of the stories is interesting. So like on this slide here, you can see there's this rock has this rope around it, and this rope, as I understand this rope symbolizes places that attract kami, attract the spirits, and so it's a way of marking places that are sacred, spiritually significant, something like that. So this rock, this sign here, or I think it was actually on the other side, but there's a sign here that was explaining, what is this rock? And said that, well, they had found some evidence that this rock was regarded as a protective deity back, 200 or 300 years ago. But then there was a landslide here in the, in the few decades before this. And the landslide was stopped from hitting the shrine right next to it by this rock, that this rock actually sort of protected the shrine, which is that shrine I just showed you with the taiko drum there, from being badly damaged, at least by the landslide. And so since then, people have revered this rock quite a bit more as a protective deity, a protective spirit. So that's just to get an idea of like how diverse and varied these stories of kami can be. This is also here in Suwa Shrine, a different spot. This fountain, it's shooting up water in the middle. The sign says that it's the oldest, or this is the site of the oldest mechanical fountain in Japan. I can't remember, 1800s at somewhere. And then there was a little note, and it was rebuilt in 1946 or 47 maybe. There's little reminders of the bombing all over in Nagasaki, probably Hiroshima too, but we didn't spend as much time there. It doesn't say because of the bomb, but okay, well, why would you have to rebuild something in 1946? Oh, yes, it's because it was, the atomic bomb was dropped in 1945. It was interesting to be in Nagasaki and have those things together, the juxtaposition of these things, ancient things, but also ancient things that have had to be rebuilt or restored because of the bombing. And then, well, we'll see in a little bit, but the overlap of the strong Christian historic presence here in Nagasaki, and the, I guess irony is too soft a word, but the difficulty of the fact that that's one of the cities that the U.S. that we bombed in World War II. I'll get more to that later on in the slideshow. This next one, I think, is a video. Yeah, this is a video. And so same spot. I think I moved the camera too fast, so hopefully it doesn't give you motion sickness. But mostly I wanted you to hear the sound of cicadas, these little bugs. Semi in Japanese is what they're called, but cicadas, who are very loud in the summer. Like there were places where we couldn't hear each other talking because the cicadas were so loud. It's just this sort of buzzing, chirping, almost reminds me of crickets somewhat sound. So this video plays here. But you just hear that constant, and that's just a constant sound. As soon as the sun comes up, basically you hear that, and especially in places like this with lots of trees, you hear it quite loudly. And like I said, it could be so loud we couldn't hear ourselves, basically. Born Shinto, married Christian, and then Buddhism then. So this is born Shinto, married Christian, die Buddhist. So Buddhism, Bukkyo, that's what the Japanese there says. It's a Japanese word for Buddhism, which basically means Buddhist teaching. So it came to Japan from China, so not original to Japan, although it certainly has developed. It's been in Japan for 1,500 to 2,000 years, somewhere in that range. Came to Japan from China, but has undergone some changes there. So two of the major versions of Buddhism that we know of from Japan. Zen Buddhism, which is actually a Japanese version of a Chinese form of, I think, Chan Buddhism. I'm not sure of the pronunciation of that. And then this Shin Buddhism, which actually does originate in Japan. But basically, Buddhism in general, there's so many different branches and schools and traditions. It's hard to say anything about Buddhism in general, but I'd say, as I understand it best, the basic goal of Buddhism is to achieve enlightenment. And what's meant by enlightenment is that this is an escape from the eternal cycle of reincarnation and suffering. So life and the world is this sort of eternal wheel, this circle that we're all going in and out of, being reincarnated again and again in different forms, different ways, different lives. And the goal is to escape from that cycle somehow. And that's what's meant by enlightenment or nirvana. Maybe you've heard that term, not just the band from Seattle. And there's many different schools and traditions that have different methods of achieving enlightenment. For Zen Buddhism, it's about meditation in particular is the primary practice. But other Buddhisms might have entirely different ways of practice, often centered around a monastery, so becoming a monk and doing monastic practice as a way of furthering or moving along the path towards enlightenment. Shin Buddhism, which is an interesting one, that a form of this, I think it's called Pure Land Buddhism, and the Shin Buddhism form of it at least originates in Japan around maybe 1,000 years ago. I can't remember the exact date now, but sometime after the year 1000. So sometime, but not too long after. This Pure Land Buddhism and Shin Buddhism in particular has to do with this what's called the Namida Buddha. So the Namida Buddha is a Buddha, and a Buddha means a being that has achieved enlightenment, who made a vow saying, I won't achieve enlightenment until I have brought all sentient beings into my pure land, that they can come and achieve enlightenment here in my pure land. And so until I've done that, I will not achieve enlightenment. I will not become a Buddha. And then sort of the logic goes that because the Namida Buddha has become a Buddha, somehow, in some kind of timeless way, the Namida Buddha has accomplished this vow. And so Shin Buddhism focuses on this entrusting oneself to the Namida Buddha's primal promise to bring all sentient beings to enlightenment. And so one of the major kind of differences of this is rather than having to be done in monasteries, is something that can be done throughout everyday life, that people can just there's this little thing that you say where I entrust myself to the Namida Buddha, basically, and you can just say that without ceasing throughout your day as sort of a mantra as you go about your normal work, as you have family and so on. And so Shin Buddhism is one of the things that makes it unique within Buddhism is its priests don't have to be in the monasteries. They can marry, they can have children and family. You can be working, making your way along the path to enlightenment simply by entrusting the Namida Buddha's power to bring you along. It's an interesting parallel with Christianity, especially Protestant or Lutheran Christianity. This idea of justification by faith, right? That we trust in the power of another to bring us to salvation. That there's actually a very close parallel here in Shin Buddhism. Close enough that there's a story that I've heard, and I don't know if this is historical or not, but I've heard this, that when the first missionaries, Christian missionaries, arrived in Japan, and they were Jesuit, so Roman Catholic missionaries. This was shortly after Martin Luther had died. Actually, it was within, I think, 10 years or so of his death in that first decade. That they heard the story of the monk Shinron who originated this form of Shin Buddhism, Jodo Shinshu, I think is the full name, and about how he left the monastery and got married, and they thought they actually. The story is they thought that they were talking about Luther, like the Lutherans beat us here somehow. I don't know if that's historical or true, but I've heard that as an anecdote. But just to point, there are these interesting similarities, which is something that I've been thinking about, the similarities and the differences and what this means kind of going forward. But anyways, practices of Buddhism. So temple visits. This is a picture that here of a temple and a shrine to a Buddhist shrine here called a Daibutsu, which just means big Buddha in Japanese. So these giant Buddha statues that are around. This one's big. It's probably about 12 or 15 feet high, I think, at the head. We didn't go in, but from what we could see from the outside. And then, but temple visits, funerals, and then obon is a practice, which is important, or I mentioned because that's what we were in Japan for during the obon festival in Nagasaki specifically, which is I'll talk about it a little bit more, but it's a Day of the Dead sort of festival. You kind of think of it that way. It's a honoring of ancestors, especially those who have died in the past year. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like in Nagasaki, but throughout Japan, it looks like grave visitation, going home to see family during the 3 days of Obon. Yeah, the Nagasaki has this very unique tradition of this parade, which I'll talk about more. So here's just some picture of some Buddhist statues that we saw around. This is actually in that same temple, I think, area was that Daibutsu statue from the last slide, but a Buddhist monk here. Here's another, this is a Jizu statue, which are all over in Japan. You know them from their red hat and vest. They're protectors of children and travelers, and so you'll see them along roadsides all the time, often with water bottles left with them as an offering to help travelers who need water on their journey. This one is interesting. This is actually this is in Hiroshima. This is near the atomic bomb hypocenter site. And the sign here, I don't know if you can make it out here in English, it says the atom bomb struck Jizu-san. Or Jizo, I said Jizu. It's Jizo-san. And it says the pedestal has Jizo-san's shadow on its face. So you can see this dark spot under. When the bomb went off, the radiation from the bomb scorched clean a lot of stones, and so the parts that were hit by the radiation became like white. All of the just the dirt and mold or algae or whatever had been on them over time got like kind of burnt off, and you can see that this area wasn't touched because the bomb was above this Jizo statue when it went off. Again, little reminders of this kind of all over. Here's another one. This is actually right next to, you can see the Daibutsu statue back there. Another little Buddhist statue. I don't know who specifically that might be honoring. This is a statue of Kanon, or I've also seen it written in one spot as Kwanon with a W. I'm not sure on the pronunciation, but a Buddhist, deity, often depicted with children. So a woman with children. I saw several depictions of her throughout Japan, and she's important, or part of the relevance that I see for me, anyways, is when she was pulled into Christian practice in an interesting way in Japan, especially during the times when Christianity was illegal. But I'll get to that more a little bit later on in the slideshow. Here's another one. Yeah, here's another one here. This was outside this temple. This is near Unzen Onsen. So this kind of very fearsome looking figure with a sword. I have another picture on my next slide with another one. This says something like, I was trying to translate this as much as I can. This says something like cancer cutting or killing and sickness cutting. That the idea is that his sword is raised against the sort of the evils of the world, the sicknesses, diseases, evil spirits, whatever. And so you'll see depictions of these very fierce sword wielding with fire, that they're sort of purifying the world. And so I don't know if there's the cancer, sickness cutting. I don't know if that's if there's sort of an expectation that like maybe you go and you pray at this temple particularly because it has this statue or association with this anti-sickness, anti-cancer kind of deity. I don't know. I'm not sure how that functions, but I just found that interesting there. Here's another picture of a similar one. This is really big. This is on our bus ride up to Unzen Onsen. So I just got a quick picture out the window as we pass by. That's quite big. I mean, you can maybe get a sense of the scale. You see the cars there. So the big reason we went when we went to Nagasaki was for the Obon, which is the 3-day festival of remembering those who have died, spirit boat procession, which is a thing that happens in Nagasaki specifically. And so this Obon no Shoryo Nagashi in Japanese. So Obon is a 3-day festival. It's honoring the dead, visiting family, visiting the graves. In Nagasaki specifically, there's fireworks and there's this procession on the last night of Obon. So that was the Friday night that we were there. And the way the spirit boat procession works is basically this kind of community parade where families or neighborhood groups or maybe temples, temple groups, they make these parade floats for those who have died in the previous year, and they carry them to the harbor, and then they put at least part of the float. We saw people sort of taking away the wheels and all that, and there'd be sort of a boat thing under it, and putting that into the harbor and letting it go out to the sea, out to the west. And the idea is it's going to the western Pure Lands, which is where the Namida Buddha resides, so the kind of this realm of the spirits, and escorting the spirits of those who have died and letting them know where you are with firecrackers and celebration, and letting them go out. And I guess they used to let them just go out of the harbor into the ocean, and now I think they collect them before they get out of the harbor, and so they don't cause problems for boats and such. But that's unique to Nagasaki. So nowhere else that I know of does a tradition quite like this. Different parts of Japan will have different types of traditions, but this one's unique to Nagasaki. So I've got some videos here actually of what that looked like. So yeah, you can see here, this is one of those spirit boats, one of the shoryo. And there's a group here, and this might be for one person or might be for a few people. We saw different kinds, but a few videos here, and there's got, just so you know, a lot of firecrackers, just constant firecrackers. So it's going to sound a little bit like a war zone. So just be aware of that before you continue. Turn your volume down if you need. You hear the gong being hit. Here's another video. They were waiting for the nitrogen. And Japan is incredibly clean. Like there's just not trash. You don't see trash on the roads at all. So this was like the one exception, like all of these spent firecracker boxes and firecracker remains. But I loved how kind of wild it was with the firecrackers, but also how orderly it was. I mean, so you saw they were literally waiting at the intersection for the light to turn green. And then you heard the police whistle saying, okay, you can cross now, basically. Here's a little later. So you can just hear just how loud, and you can see the remains from all of the groups that have gone through before with the firecrackers. And, and using those little string firecrackers, which, I don't even have much experience with because they've been illegal most of my life, here anyway. And, but they're just holding them in the box as they go off. They hold the box out with their hand and just let them kind of blow out of the box. Sometimes some of the groups are more kind of playful than other groups. Some groups are fairly serious, kind of more solemn, kind of a lot of variety in that way. I remember one group that we saw a couple of times, one of the big floats. Must have been a group one. There were a couple guys that kept like tossing firecrackers at each other's feet, that sort of thing. At one point, I saw a police officer actually walk over and be like, "Nope, stop that." But yeah, uh, it was just noisy and it was festive, but it was also sort of serious feeling in some ways. And I've got several pictures of some of these particular parade floats, the spirit boats, coming up, and you can see some of the variety of what those looked like. We were very glad we could find earplugs. We had to go to several stores to find earplugs because we didn't think about it until we were there. And I had some, but I just left them in the room. And so we had to go to like 3 or 4 stores. People were so helpful and were really, happy when they found some for us. But a lot of other people were clearly thinking the same thing. So here's another of the spirit boats here. This is earlier in the day. This is on the way down to the parade. We saw several groups or families sometimes just bringing their individual boats, parade floats down before it started, and just kind of along the road following traffic laws as it goes. You can see the golf swing happening here. Apparently, I'm guessing this person liked golf. The person that this is in honor of. And then here's another group. So they're leading this big one back here. You can see this is a big group. So I don't know. I noticed there's a face on all of their vests, things that they're wearing. So maybe that's the one person. Maybe it's one float for that person with all these people. Big family or company or something like that. I don't know. Here's another smaller one. You can see a picture of the person there. Here's one. It seems to be for a family dog. Here's another one. Some kind of rackets or something. I'm guessing a hobby of the person. This is one that we saw broken down here. You can see they're trying to fix it. One of the wheels under this seemed to have broken, and it kind of fell down onto this. So they were working to get it working. You can see the police just supervising here, making sure everybody's safe. Yeah, here's another one. You can see the um, shrimp there. I don't know, like seafood maybe. Here's another. This was probably the biggest one we saw, or a real big one. I don't know if you can see it that well, but there's a bunch of pictures. These are all different people. So this is a group one. I don't know if this is like a temple, maybe a Buddhist temple, or maybe a big neighborhood group. I don't know. But if I'm understanding it right, all of these are pictures of people who died within the last year or since the last Obon festival, and so are all being honored in this way. Uh, okay, so moving on from the Shoryo Nagashi, still in the Buddhism topic though. This is actually in Shimabara, and I think this is from the top of Shimabara Castle, if I remember right. And this is a cemetery. So we see these cemeteries all over. Um, and there were a bunch in this area, all near Buddhist temples. In fact, that's a Buddhist temple right there. That's, I think, part of the same complex. There's another temple there. That whole area was called Temple Town, basically. I can't remember the Japanese for it off the top of my head now. But you can see all of these are individual like family graves. All have their little monument that comes up here. And then they're all kind of together. I've got a closer look at some here. So here's one. This is not in Shimabara. This is at a different spot. But again, you can see each of these are like different family graves. And I don't know exactly how big of a family, like how extended of a family these are. I don't know. But I know cremation is the typical burial practice I think in Buddhism in general, but certainly in Japan. And so the cremains are placed, I think, down in this. Somehow I don't know the details of how that works. But you notice there's this big kind of open area. So something that's somewhat unique to, here's another picture of it, the way that the kind of graves are done in Kyushu and the Nagasaki area, as opposed to the rest of Japan, is they're gathering spaces. So like on Obon, family will come and they'll kind of hold vigil here at the family gravesite, and they'll set off fireworks here, and it's somewhat festive. Um, Grave visitation is a thing in other parts of Japan as well, but it's not really festive in the same way. And so there isn't these built-in gathering spots. So we saw graveyards outside of this area too, that would just have the monument. They didn't have this sort of courtyard, so you could get more of them in, right? You could fit more in a smaller space. But yeah, just not designed to have that. And like fireworks, I think my understanding is in most of Japan, fireworks during Obon grave visitations would be considered kind of disrespectful. But in Nagasaki, it's the proper thing to do. It's just the way it's done. Okay, so we've talked about Shinto and Buddhism, and then Christianity, which is actually, the reason we went was to learn about the history of Christianity and see some of the sites. So in Japanese there it says Kiristo-kyo, which is what you call Japanese word for Christianity. So it's very much a minority religion. Less than 2% of the population identifies as Christian. But there's Catholics, there's Lutherans, there's other Protestants, Orthodox. There's other sort of Christian adjacent groups, that have presences there. LDS, Jehovah's Witnesses, that sort of thing. Yeah, in that phrase we said married Christian. I already kind of talked about this a little bit, but Christian style weddings have become very popular. Although I'd say I would want to call them Western style weddings. They're not really about Christian faith. It's just sort of a Western European style wedding ceremony tradition that Japanese couples have liked. But Christianity first arrives in Japan in 1549. So the history goes back, I think, farther than I expected it to. I kind of thought of it as a more, last couple of centuries thing. But 1549 is when the first Portuguese Jesuit missionaries arrived there. And then this figure here, I liked this. This is taken actually at the Museum of the 26 Martyrs, which I'll talk about here in a little bit. She has a name and I've forgotten what her name is, but apparently this isn't just a Japanese thing, this kind of anime style, you see it has the rosary necklace. This is apparently the Roman Catholic mascot for 2025 Jubilee year, and I can't remember what her name is. Anyway, but we saw that there and thought that was an interesting little combination of cultures there. So here's a timeline of Christianity in Japan. So starting in 1549, so you have Portuguese Jesuit missionaries arrive. So Japan is very divided. This time is kind of a long period of civil war. It's known as the Warring States period, or Sengoku Jidai in Japanese. So it's a time of a lot of tumultuousness in Japanese politics. There's different local feudal lords are all sort of battling each other, and there is an emperor during this time. The emperor doesn't have any power and the imperial family hadn't had power. They're just figureheads for centuries at this point. And so local daimyo are fighting over who gets to be the one in charge, the shogun, which is basically like the general of the army, but at this time was what the ruler of Japan was. So in the 1560s, several local daimyo, which are the local feudal lords, they convert to Christianity along with their subjects. Most of those are down in western Japan, near Nagasaki and Kyushu, although there were some in other places too. And a lot of those seem like they were quite possibly politically or economically motivated, although it's hard. How do you judge that? It's a little hard to say, but a lot of them seem to be more for this might give them alliances with Europeans, which might help them in these sort of civil wars in Japan. Towards the end of the 1560s, Japan begins to unify. So there's a famous figure in Japanese history, Oda Nobunaga, known as the Great Uniter of Japan, who really begins to bring this period to an end. He doesn't really successfully unite Japan. At least Japan's not at peace during his life. He dies in battle, in fact. But him and his successors, and especially the one who's two after him, are really the ones who are really able to centralize power in Japan. But this is sort of the beginning of the end in 1568, the beginning of the end of that Civil War period, and Japan begins to centralize and unite again. In 1587, Jesuits are formally expelled from Japan, and Christianity is actually made illegal, or at least missionary Christianity is made illegal at that time. Although it's not really enforced, it's sort of on paper. But then by the end of the 16th century, so 1597, there's an incident called the San Felipe incident, which is where a Spanish ship um, basically washes ashore onto Japan, gets blown in a storm, gets off course, and ends up in Japan. So it wasn't supposed to be in Japan. And a rumor comes out of that, and it's a little unclear exactly how, but that uh, the Spanish are intending to use Christianity and missionaries as a kind of a frontline softening force so that they can come in and make a colony out of Japan and be expand the Spanish and Portuguese empires. Um, I don't think that was true for the Jesuits or maybe the Franciscans either. I'm not sure about the Franciscans as much. I just don't know as much about them, but there were certainly elements of truth. It was certainly believable if you look at the history of what Spain in particular was doing in the Americas with missionaries around this time. You can see how Christianity was perceived as perhaps a tool of imperialistic hopes from Europe. And so the Japanese government, which was, as I said, more and more centralizing at this time, begins to see Christianity as a threat. So in response to that, there are 26 Christians, Japanese Christians almost entirely, who are rounded up in Kyoto, which is where the capital was at the time, and marched all the way down to Nagasaki, hundreds of miles, and they are publicly executed by crucifixion in Nagasaki. And those are the first Christian martyrs in Japan. So continuing forward then, and by those 26 martyrs who went to that museum. So continuing forward then, Christian missionaries began to be expelled by force at this point. So they had already been illegal for 10 years, and now they're being expelled by force. 1597. 1600, there's this big battle. That's kind of the decisive battle that ends the Civil War period, the Warring States period. And so Tokugawa Ieyasu, he becomes the de facto leader of Japan, the shogun. And the Tokugawa shogunate, as it's called, so kind of the regime that comes from him, so him and his descendants, they're going to reign for 250 plus years, pretty much without any challenges or not any serious challenges to their power until the end of that. And so his hostility towards Christianity and that government's hostility towards Christianity is going to be the defining orientation of Japan towards Christianity throughout the whole 250-year period, called the Edo period often. So 1603 is when Tokugawa officially becomes shogun. There's, for the next 30 years or so, there's just a fair amount of periodic Christian martyrdoms. They begin to use this tactic called the fumie, which is a brass image of Jesus or sometimes Mary, and they would make people who they suspected of being Christians go and step on this fumie as a way of renouncing Christianity. This plays a big part of the novel Silence by Shusaku Endo, which is one of the things that got me interested in some of this history. And actually I have a picture of a replica of one. Not many of them survived, so they weren't treated that well, I guess, and they were seen as kind of worthless. And then in 1637 is when the Shimabara Rebellion happens, which I mentioned earlier, and we went to some of the sites of. So the Shimabara Rebellion was it was a Christian rebellion, depending what you mean by Christian, but it was certainly those who started it and who fought in it fought under a Christian banner. They saw, some of them at least saw themselves as fighting even on behalf of Christ, and that confirmed any suspicions that the Tokugawa government had about Christianity and its relation to Western imperial powers like Spain or Portugal. So after that rebellion is quelled, Japan closes its ports to foreigners with just a few exceptions. One of the famous ones being the Dutch, who are allowed to have this little, I think, just a few acres island in Nagasaki Harbor as a little bit of limited trade that they're allowed to have. So the Dutch were able to convince the government that they weren't they weren't the same as the Jesuits or the Franciscans or the Catholics in general. So they were Calvinist. So for that next, 200 plus years after the rebellion is put down, there is very harsh systemic nationwide persecution of Christians, but especially in the Nagasaki area, so in Kyushu, because that's just where most of the Christians are. And yet some Christians continue. They're called kakure Kirishitan, which is hidden Christians. And they find a way to hide themselves, to hide their practice as Christians. So there were a few fishing villages, like on kind of outlying islands, just far away from, the government's eye, that were able to be sort of just Christian villages, basically. Or there would be households that would pass it down, parents to children to generation to generation. Yeah, they they kept some form of Christianity alive during that whole 200-year period. So in 1854, the end of the Edo period, Japan reopens to the rest of the world. The United States has a big role in that, with sometimes called gunboat diplomacy. Like they literally sailed a gunboat into Edo Bay, which is now called Tokyo Bay, and fired at the land until they were allowed to dock, and then got a trade deal signed, basically a trade treaty. Japan is undergoing a lot of turmoil also at this time, partly because Western military technology, which is just better metalworking and better cannons and artillery, that sort of thing. I say American, but Western in general, is coming in, and so you're getting a transition from sort of what we think of as traditional Japan with samurai with swords and that sort of thing to fighting with rifles and more of a kind of a modern army. It's also during this time that Japan begins to sort of westernize, and a lot of it's driven by technology interest. I mean, Japan was already paying attention to what was going on, but now like trade is opening up in a new way. And then 1873, which is the end of what's called the Edo period, Christianity becomes legal officially. And this is what's called the Meiji Restoration. It's the beginning of Imperial Japan, at least as we know it from up to World War II. So the imperial family, which I think I had mentioned before, hadn't had power for centuries. They take power. And so Japan becomes an empire fully, not just in name, with an imperial family and an emperor who actually have power and hold power. They depose the shogun, the Tokugawa family. And as a result of this and this kind of westernization that they're interested in, and they're interested in expanding imperially, they start to invade places around them, Korea, China, fight with Russia, that sort of thing. They're trying to become more Western in a lot of ways, and Christianity's legalization is part of that, and also a de-elevation of Buddhism, which was seen as at least some of the Buddhist schools, which were seen as allies of the previous regime, happens at this time too. There's a story from this legalization period where after one of the first Catholic churches was rebuilt, or was built, I guess, in 1870s, that as soon as it was opened and dedicated, these Japanese people came in and asked the priest for confession, and the priest was blown away because to the outside world there were no Christians left in Japan. At least that's what everybody was thinking. But they came in and they asked for confession. They had kept these traditions. They were some of these hidden Christians from that area, and it becomes clear that what they've passed down is sort of changed form. It's a game of telephone, right, over time. They have sort of fragments of prayers like the Lord's Prayer or the Ave Maria, the Hail Mary prayer, but they're sort of mixed with kind of half-remembered Latin, Portuguese, and Japanese, and the meanings of them have changed a lot over time. And in fact, there still remain today Christians in Japan who are called separated Christians, Hanare Hirishitan, if I remember right, which decided not to reunite with the Roman Catholic Church. Their traditions had changed so much. They said, well, we're going to practice it like our ancestors practiced it. And it's in some cases, barely recognizable as kind of mainstream Christianity. But yeah, some of those very small, not very many at all, like maybe just a few hundred, still remain practicing in that sort of way. So places we went, some of the sites we went to. The first one I want to look at is the 26 Martyrs Museum. So this is a really, really striking one. You can see there's a monument to the 26 martyrs here. You can see these statues. There's this big, it's a cathedral, I suppose, but it's built as a monument to this. And and then this here is the museum of the 26 martyrs. And then this is actually the hill where the martyrdom took place in Nagasaki. This is right here. You can see it here in I guess kind of downtown, this is more downtown, but right near downtown Nagasaki. The main station is right there. So when you come out, you look out and you see that big cathedral right across there. So there it is. Here it's kind of dwarfed by these bigger buildings that have grown up over time, but it's right there. It's one of the first things you see, and it really is very eye-catching, those spires. Of course, this was built, I think it was built in the 20s, if I remember right, and then had to be rebuilt after World War II, after the bomb. But there it is. It's very prominent and visible. Here's a closer look of the monument itself. You notice that there are some children involved in this. I think the youngest was 12, if I remember right. Closer looks here. Interesting part of the artwork here is you notice they're all floating. They're all hovering, right? Their feet are not on the ground. They're not standing. They're ascending, I think, is kind of the image. Another picture, different angle. This is a picture of, this is actually looking up at a wall. The perspective's interesting here, but this is all this, I guess you'd call this a mosaic, but it's like a 3D mosaic on the side of the wall of the museum. So this is kind of behind that monument there. But you see the communion chalice, you see a cross, all sorts of things as you look and see more here. It's very striking, especially up close. Here's another angle of that. Here's another art installation there. I guess you'd call this a mosaic too, but it has no color. But it seems like a bunch of grapes and a vine that's going to the cross here. Here's a picture from inside the museum there, depicting the crucifixion or one of the martyrs being crucified. There's another picture from inside that museum. This is her name was Gracia, basically, and she was pretty famous in that era of Japan. I think it's still pretty well known. She was the wife of one of the higher up daimyos during the Civil War period. She ends up actually being killed, kind of in a battle, taken hostage and killed. But was known for her Christian faith. So this picture you see, she's holding a rosary. This is an interesting little artifact that pulls together a lot of threads in itself. So if you see down here, this is a bombed Maria, and it says Kwanon. I saw that it says Kanon other places, so I'm not sure if that's a typo or if that's a different spelling. But remember that Buddhist deity, the one with the children that I showed earlier, that's Kanon or Kwanon here. During the time of the hidden Christians, one of the things they would do is they would disguise their things as their Christian articles of worship as Buddhist and Kanon, because she's a female depicted with children, was a common stand-in for Mary. So this is a Maria Kwanon, or Kanon, um, who is, a statue of Mary disguised as the Buddhist deity Kanon. And then the other piece that's interesting here is that it was in the Utakami area when the bomb was dropped, just right near where the bomb was dropped. And so she bears the marks of the bombing. So all those things there um, tied together. So another site that we went to, one of the, I guess you could call it a Christian site, is this place called Unzen Hell, or Unzen Jigoku. Um, and yeah, you can see the steam rising here, and yeah, all the sulfur color and all that here. So this was a site of persecution, actually. So there were Christians, among others. It wasn't only Christians, but those who were seen as a threat to the government for whatever reason, that were tortured using the steaming hot water and killed here. So it's a tourist area. It's a hot spring area, but it has this history to it as well, all wrapped up into it. So here's a shot of the map. You can see, yeah, kind of this resort town's up in the mountains. It was the coolest in the sense of temperature area that we were in, because we were just up at a higher elevation. It was only, I want to say it was in the mid 70s in the morning when we got there on the bus, which was by quite a bit the coolest temperature we had seen in Japan. But yeah, so we just came up as a day trip. And you can see right here, this is the Unzen Hell, or Unzen Jigoku. This is part of it too. These kind of spots where they're, yeah, kind of like geyser fields, except without the geysers, just these bubbling fumaroles and steam vents and all of that. And the Christian Martyrdom Monument up there. So here's some pictures from that. In fact, this is a video, gives you a sense of it. In the background there, you can see another one of them. This is actually, they were steaming eggs in these and then selling the eggs for $1 basically, or actually a little less. So you could eat a hard-boiled egg. An onsen. Onsen means hot spring in Japanese. So an onsen egg, onsen tamago, and we had one, and it tasted like a hard-boiled egg and smelled a little bit of sulfur. But yeah, it was fun. A lot of cats around here for some reason, just wandering around. We saw more cats here than we did anywhere else. So here's another picture of, you can just see how, barren the area where the vents are coming up, because the sulfur is obviously, and the heat is deadly to the plants. But up here, you can see a cross up there. That's the monument to the Christians who were killed here in the 1600s. Here's that up close. And it seems like it had become somewhat recently been, some of these plaques were newer. There were some older plaques up here too. So it seems like it had been redone or restored a bit recently when we were there. Here's another kind of shot of the whole this whole Jigoku area. And you can't probably see it in this picture, but maybe you can. But the cross, that's the monument there. So it's not obvious, it's a tourist area. So it's kind of a downer sort of thing to have at a tourist area. So it's a little bit out of the way to get to. You have to kind of try to get to it. It is on the signs and stuff, but it's not on the main path. But it's placed in such a way that you can see it from, all over the area if you know to look for it. But it doesn't stick out. It kind of blends in. This is a picture I just thought was fun. This was actually roped off. We weren't allowed to be on it. But the sign that was next to it, as best as I could translate it using my phone mostly, said, "Feel the heat of the onsen," and so you could. This is like a hotspot area, and so you could, I don't know, have your lunch on these rocks that are hot because of the activity underneath them. I'm guessing it probably got a little too active and wasn't safe anymore because they had them roped off. As I said, they weren't there available anymore. There's another shot looking at it. So these are, it's very hot water here. That's the main road that goes through this part of town. Here's another shot. So you can see another big steam area, another Jigoku over there, and each of these Jigoku have their own names. And again, Jigoku means like the characters, the Chinese characters used to write it mean Earth prison. And I don't know what the Buddhist concept of hell is exactly that is borrowing from, but the idea is it would be something like this, I guess, is why they're called that. So the next couple of spots I wanted to show have to do with the Shimabara Rebellion. So a little bit about what that is. So the Shimabara Rebellion was in 1637, and it was it began as a peasants' revolt due to high taxes. So there was the daimyo, the local feudal lord, the one who was in charge of this area, the Shimabara area, was really well known, well regarded, pretty famous. And after his son took over from him, his son seems to have had a chip on his shoulder and wanted to prove himself, and he wanted to prove himself by showing himself to be, more powerful. That his region was very prosperous. So he would promise higher amounts of taxes from his region, to the government as a way of trying to up his own status. He also built or had Shimabara Castle built as part of this. And basically just all of this meant that he was taxing his people very highly. And there were several bad growing seasons in a row that happened. And so there was this peasants' uprising, basically, around taxes mostly, or there was all of this unrest. There was ready to be an uprising. At the same time, there were these former samurai from the losing side of the civil wars, which had ended, 30 years before. And not all of them, but at least some of them, they had served a Christian daimyo, and at least some of them were Christians themselves. And so you kind of get the sense that they were down in this area, kind of just laying low, and that they kind of, were getting into older age. They were warriors by training, hadn't been able to fight any battles for 30 years. They kind of wanted to go out with a bang. So there's all this unrest, peasant unrest happening. There's these samurai here that are talking about it, and then there's this figure named Amakusa Shiro, and Amakusa is actually the name of the island group around here, so that's just where he's from. And he's 16 or 17, it's a little unclear, and known he has this reputation for being very devout. He's a Christian. He's apparently had visions of Jesus. Apparently, these are rumors, and we don't have things directly from him. We just have stories about him. And so it's hard to know how many of these are true or just legends that are either just kind of grow up around him, or were started by these samurai who wanted to make him into a figurehead for their own rebellion. I don't know. But either way, he's very charismatic, apparently very good looking, and has sort of this semi-miraculous saintly status attributed to him. And so he's the leader, at least a figurehead leader. Maybe more than that, but it's hard to say. We don't have, we don't know all of it wasn't all recorded, written down, the kind of the machinations of this. But this was in, I think this is in the Arima Christian Heritage Museum, if I remember right. And so they had all these miniatures, kind of different scenes from the rebellion. So this is Shiro preaching, basically, and people sitting and listening. And you can see his banner there, which is you see the chalice with the communion wafer there, and I think two angels, one on either side. That was his banner that was raised, when they battled. So it was a Christian rebellion, and I put Christian in quotes there because, like I said, it was about taxes, and it was about the losing side of the Civil War, and it was also Christian in some ways. So, this area was more Christian than most other areas, and so there were certainly Christians in the area too who were very dissatisfied with the persecution of Christians, the crackdown on Christianity that had happened over the previous few decades. So when the uprising starts, they attack. They know that they have about a period of a few weeks, or about 8 weeks, if I remember right, 6 to 8 weeks, from this moment they start the uprising until government troops arrive to put down the uprising, because that's how long it takes for word to get up to Kyoto, the capital, and then for permission to be granted by the shogun for the neighboring feudal areas to mobilize their armies to help. So basically, they know they've got this long, and they need to have a stronghold of some kind before that period comes to an end. So they attack several castles, or 3 castles around. Shimabara Castle is one of them, but they're unable to take any of those castles. They damage them, they siege them, but they are on a tight timeline. They can't just wait it out. They have to have a castle of their own. So eventually they fall back and they go to the Hara Castle ruins. And so Hara Castle had not been used for a long time. It still had a lot of walls and structures up, but they weren't in good repair. So they end up going there and building it up, refortifying it to wait for the shogun's armies to arrive. They hole up there. The armies arrive. There's a siege. Eventually, somebody inside the rebels' camp betrays them. Basically, they repel some attacks. Some of the attackers are killed. Kind of ill-advised attacks that happen because the shogun's armies can just wait till they starve. They don't have to actually risk themselves. But some of the generals of the shogun's armies found that dishonorable and so attacked anyway, and those attacks were repelled until finally somebody on the inside betrays them, and the castle or the ruins, the encampment is taken, and all, depending on which source you read, between 27 and 37,000 people are executed. And actually that at the time was most of the population of that peninsula. So the peninsula, there's entire villages that are depopulated after this rebellion, to the extent that the government has to bring in peasants, farmers from other places in Japan in order to farm the land. So a lasting impact on the region. So Shimabara Castle, which you've already seen at the front slide there, was one of the places that we went to as a site of this rebellion. It wasn't a site for very long because they attacked it and couldn't take it. But yeah, here's the map zone, the town of Shimabara. Our hotel was just a few blocks, southish of it. This is a picture of the moat, so you can see the fortification wall here. And there is at least some of the moat had water in it. I think there's water under all these lily pads, whatever these are. This is also in the moat. There's a heron there, or crane maybe, I guess. This is a picture of the foundation wall of the main castle. Is this the main castle building? I think it is, or one of the other buildings. There's several buildings up there. So you get inside, the whole thing's a museum basically. There's 5 floors of the main castle. And it has all, kind of standard things you'd expect to find in a Japanese castle. It has suits of armor. It has, swords, so different swords that a few pictures of. There's a suit of samurai armor there. There was one of the floors was dedicated, at least one of the floors was dedicated to the Shimabara Rebellion. Another floor was dedicated to the hidden Christians, which was a surprise. I didn't expect to see that there. But yeah, so you can see this is this model of the rebellion basically. So these are the Hara Castle ruins, and they were an easily fortified position, even if the walls weren't up or in great shape at the time. You could see how they could hole up here, and it would be hard for somebody to come across on land to attack them up there. They'd have the big advantage. But so these are all the various armies that were encamped against them, sieging them. And then you can see their banners here, and you see some crosses on the banners as the defensive emplacements that they had. This is a painting depicting the siege of Shimabara Castle, which was, as I said, unsuccessful. But you can see that these are farming implements, right? This is the Peasants' Rebellion. This is another picture in there. So something that happened. This is later, late 1790s, I think. There was a big volcanic eruption that actually did a great deal of damage to downtown Shimabara, or to the main town of Shimabara. Um, this was a copy of the report that was sent depicting what had happened. So you can see the volcanic eruption being depicted here. Report to the capital of what had happened there. That's the mountain that's being depicted in that drawing. Actually, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this kind of depression area, one of the things that happened is this whole thing was bigger and it kind of just collapsed. So kind of Mount St. Helens like, if you think about it. So that's kind of remnants, leftovers. And actually these areas of like trees here, and maybe these two, I don't know, but definitely this is where the lava flow was, and then cooled, and now there's trees growing there. 200 some years later. This is a picture looking to the east across the Ariake Sea from the top of the castle. And actually, so we took a ferry across to Kumamoto, which is over there, I think on this side actually is where we landed, over there somewhere. This is also, these are, I don't know, copies, I guess, of the stained glass windows from the Catholic Church in Shimabara, which depict martyrdom. So this is during, especially the 1600s, early 1600s. But yeah, you can see the various methods of torturing and killing Christians that happen. So being marched up the mountain to Unzen, to the onsen, the hot springs up there, thrown into the sea, burned. This is outside the castle. This is a statue of Amakusa Shiro, the young leader uh, of the rebellion. You can see he's usually depicted like this, with his hands folded in prayer, and then the cross on a necklace around. I think it's a rosary necklace around his neck, but with a sword at his side. I've got a couple other depictions of him. Here's another one. And here's a modern anime style one that was in there. I was surprised at how prevalent he was in the area. Even outside of museums, would see a picture of him, a depiction of him in some way. Um, I wish I could, ask people what they know or think about the rebellion, like how it lives on in the minds of people in the area now. But clearly in the museums, it's like a very important part of their history. And, the Christianity part of it is visible. Even if it's not quite, the violent rebellion isn't the thing I want Christianity to be remembered for there. And yet it's all part of this history there. Things that I was wrestling with while there, and still. This is just a for fun picture. So apparently it seemed like there was some sort of little, I don't know what you call this, publicity project for the castles of Japan, where they have, this is a Shimabara castle as a giant robot. It was very Japanese. And there was even it was playing on a little screen here, a little like 2-minute short of of the castle transforming into the robot and, doing some kind of battle. Apparently there's these for a lot of castles across Japan. They have their own robot mech versions of themselves. But we just thought that was fun. So another place we went related to the rebellion, of course, was the Hara Castle ruins and the Arima Christian Heritage Museum, which are both in the same spot. So you can see this is what the ruins look like today. Nothing left of the fortifications. In fact, after the rebellion, they were all intentionally deconstructed. Anything that was there was torn down as a never again kind of thing. So you can see where they are. So we took the bus down, and then walked through this whole area, which is a bunch of farms. Most of the ruins are actually private farmland, and there's trails through, but there's signs saying don't walk through the fields, that sort of thing. And after that, we then walked kind of down through here. There's somewhere in this area, there's a monument to the Christians who were memorial to the Christians who were killed in the rebellion. And then up to the Arima Heritage Museum over here. Here's some pictures. You can see the farms right in the middle of everything here, and that's the upper part of the ruins there. Picture one of the banners, the little signs on the way up. Uh, a shrine that's up there. One of the shrines here, I don't remember which one necessarily, was a monument actually to um, one of the shogun's armies that were sieging that was killed. One of the ones who actually led one of those ill-advised attacks because he didn't like waiting around, didn't seem honorable. There's actually a shrine to him, or a monument to him, maybe better than shrine here. Yeah, so this is they've done excavation. This is archaeological excavation work of the stones that were, the dismantling of the wall, the undoing of everything, and then they buried it all. So this has been um, dug and excavated. Apparently, when they excavated, they found a lot of human remains, a lot of bones here still, too. Some of which may still be entombed here. I actually don't know. This is a view from the top, looking down towards the water. You can see how we're, quite a ways up. It would be hard to attack up this as an army on foot armed with swords. There's another statue. In fact, that's seems to be a replica of the statue we saw at Shimabara Castle of Amakusa Shiro. This is a shrine to that general that I mentioned earlier. Notice this is a thing you notice too. There's shrines all over Japan like this that we saw all over. There's drinks left here. There's as an offering, as a thing for people to take. This is at the very top. This is related to the demolition of the stone walls. You can see there; these have been torn down. There was a shrine at the top. I wasn't sure what the significance of this is, but again, you can see there's been some drinks left there. Drink offerings, you could call them, I suppose. There was a dry moat up there. That's what this is from. Basically, just a hard to traverse piece of land, part of the defenses. This was inside now the Arima Christian Heritage Museum. You can see. I assume this is supposed to be Jesus looking down, and while they're all praying and about to be martyred, presumably. This was inside the museum, so you've got this is Amakusa Shiro. I think is who that's. Yeah, Shiro Amakusa, it says right there. And then this is his name's escaping me off the top of my head now, but he was the leader of the Portuguese mission in the early days, in the late 1500s. All right. So then, to completely change tactics here, the other thing that we did while we were there, since we were in Nagasaki and then had the chance to stop in Hiroshima on the way back, is we went to the atomic bomb museums. So this was an interesting picture I found. This is the damage, the blast zone, the radiation from when the bombs were dropped initially. And you can see how different they were, partly because of the landscape. So Hiroshima, at least that part of Hiroshima, it's this big flat river delta. This is Hiroshima on this side. And so it's pretty much a circle. You can tell, like, however far away from the bomb you were, that's how much was instantly disintegrated or then destroyed by fires or whatever. Nagasaki, the damage is much different because of the hills around. So you remember that picture earlier from Nagasaki, just very hilly, not flat at all. So actually, where the spirit boat procession was mostly down in this area, so kind of it missed downtown. It landed way up here. Yeah, so it was interesting as an American to be there and to go to both of these museums and peace parks. This is a picture of Hiroshima. We've sort of seen this before. But this whole area here is the Peace Park, basically. We stayed right next to the atomic bomb dome. So just a few slides from here. So here's in the Hiroshima Museum. This is a picture that was taken right after the bomb was dropped, or within, a month or two of the bomb being dropped. And this is a big wall-size mural that greets you when you first walk in. Actually, it goes 360, so you can kind of imagine you're standing in that spot and look in all directions. I guess it's not quite 360, but pretty close, and see what it looked like after. That's the atomic bomb dome. That's what so that's still there today. In fact, there it is. You can still see it and visit it. Here's another shot of it. This was actually outside of our window from our room. This is the Peace Monument in the park at Hiroshima. All of these brightly colored things are chains of origami cranes, which are a symbol of a peace symbol in Hiroshima. And they relate to the story of this schoolgirl who died as a result of radiation. She was, around for the bombing, survived the bombing, and then died. I think she was elementary school age girl, basically, and her class, to honor her, made origami cranes, and so that's become a symbol of peace, the origami crane. And so they put them in these long chains. So they basically, I think, just put needle and thread like straight through the middle of them and tie it. So you've got these long kind of chains of origami cranes. And we were there just a little bit after the 80th anniversary of the bombing. And so there had been, they were dropped in early August. We were there in mid-August. And so there were all of these cranes around. I think some of them are always there, but there were more than usual. I think we saw them in actually lots of places. Here's a statue. This says inori, which is prayer. Here's another statue. This is all Hiroshima still. This is yeah, I think if I'm reading this right, this is something like mother and child in the midst of the storm, or something like that, or maybe, yeah, something like that. But you can see she's a mother with her children, and she's running or holding them. This is the main atomic bomb museum, or a big part of it. It kind of extends. You can see these sky bridges behind it with a big fountain. The Hiroshima Park is very impressive. It's very big. It's very urban. Hiroshima is a big city. And it's very clean and neat in this way. It feels very different from how Nagasaki presents it. I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. Here's a close-up of those cranes. You can see maybe here, you can see how it's a bunch of these origami cranes over and over and over again, and they've been bound together in these long strings, chains. A lot of times they'd have like, oh, this was made by, this grade at this school in this part of Japan, or whatever. It had been sent for the memorial. Here's the Nagasaki side. So if you remember that map, the hypocenter, which is the spot under where the bomb detonated, the bombs were detonated in the air, is up here in the north. So down here is where the procession was. We were staying here on kind of the backside of this hill from that. And so the damage was especially bad up here, which was also where the most of the churches, or it was more the Christian center part of Nagasaki as well. And it was dropped on during worship on Sunday morning. Again, all these interesting connections to sort of wrestle with. Yeah. This is the hypocenter monument. So this is directly beneath where the bomb dropped. You can see it just feels very different from Hiroshima. It's much more natural in some ways. Some of that's just the elevation, or not the elevation so much, but the terrain being so hilly. But it had a very different feel, much less clean and sort of urban feeling to Hiroshima. Nagasaki is quite a bit smaller city, so that might be part of the reason. This is the remains of a cathedral wall that was left standing after the bombing, and it wasn't in this exact spot, but they moved it to this spot right next to the hypocenter monument. And so, yeah, so this is basically as it was immediately after the bomb dropped. It was the wall of a cathedral. There's in Nagasaki, one of the first things you see when you go into the museum itself is this, which is a replica of the rest of that cathedral wall. So that part that I showed you in the last slide was the real thing that had been moved from its location. This is a replica of what the rest of it looked like, that was left standing. It was very interesting to me how in Nagasaki, again, I mentioned this earlier, but the Christianity being visible there, like the 26 Martyrs Monument and so on, and even in the Atomic Bomb Museum, like the big prominent thing in the first room, or at least one of them, is the cathedral wall. And so that Christian history is visible and present there in a way that it wasn't in Hiroshima. At least we weren't there very long, but at least not where we saw. Close up of this statue here. So this again is a replica. This is not the original. The original of this statue is actually at the UN headquarters in New York, out in front, and this is what the statue looked like as soon after the bomb hit. So it survived the bomb with some damage, right? And one side's going to be cleaner. It's been burned clean than the other side, the side where the side facing the bomb. But again, the original of this is in New York as a reminder of peace. Another way that Christianity was more visible in the Nagasaki Museum. So here's melted rosaries, melted rosary, and a bunch of crosses or crucifixes that were damaged in the blast. There were some art pieces. I thought this one was very interesting. These are small. You'd hold them in your hand. Little, I guess you call them sculptures, just small sculptures. This one was called Nagasaki Pieta. I thought that was interesting. I wanted to take a picture of it. Obviously a reference to the famous statue of Mary holding Jesus after he's come down from the cross, right? Holding the body of her son. And here it is, but in the context of the atomic bomb. This is the children's fountain. This is up above the museum. Again, part of the Peace Park in Nagasaki. It's in the shape of wings, is my understanding, is what this shape represents. One of the things, the museums tell so many stories, and they're quite gut-wrenching, as you can imagine. But the cries for water, in the immediate aftermath, those who had been burned by the radiation, they wanted water to relieve their burns, which of course it wasn't going to be able to do. But so the story of this fountain is that, here's water, a way of honoring those who were crying for water. And this was right when we came into the museum. This banner that had been donated, apparently from December of last year, I see. But yeah, no more Hiroshima, Nagasaki, no more Hibakusha. And Hibakusha is atomic bomb survivor. So the idea is that never again should this happen. There's the crane as the symbol of peace. Yeah, so you can see some of the things that have been written here, mostly in Japanese, although I think I see, yeah, obviously some English. I think I see Korean there, maybe. Anyway, lots of things written there. Yeah, no nukes, yes flowers, for example. Yeah, I think I'm gonna just to pause on this slide here. This is the last picture that I have, and just kind of reflect a little bit on one of the things that I just thought was striking, and I don't know what it means. I don't have an answer for it, but noticing the difference between Hiroshima and Nagasaki and how they present their experience of the atomic bomb. The Nagasaki Museum, like I said, Christianity is very visible in that. One of the main stories that's told in that museum is of a doctor who survives the initial blast, but his family's killed in the initial blast. But he keeps going back and helping people who have been injured and wounded in the blast. And he ends up dying of cancer of some kind or complications from radiation poisoning a while later. And the story highlighted his Christian faith as motivating him for what he did. The Hiroshima Museum didn't have those sorts of stories, or at least not that we saw. It was more crowded, so we didn't necessarily see everything in that museum. And it also just felt very kind of unrelentingly heavy. We felt more hopeful coming out of the Nagasaki Museum than we did the Hiroshima Museum. Again, I don't know if those connections mean anything, but there were things that I'm still sort of chewing on and reflecting. One of the questions that came up when I gave this presentation, a few weeks back, a week and a half, whenever that was, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, was how did this experience change me, and how would it change my, my ministry, my preaching, teaching? And I still don't know if I quite know the answer to that, but definitely something that has been sitting with me a lot, even more over the last few weeks, I guess, just continuing, is the ways in which, what does it mean for something to be Christian? I think has been part of what I've been thinking of. So, Christianity in Japan is going to look different than Christianity in Germany or in the U.S. or Tanzania, right? And things like the Christian rebellion, the Shimabara Christian rebellion, is that Christian? Did Jesus really appear to Amakusa Shiro and tell him to do this, to march to battle, to do this thing that will end in 30,000+ people being killed? Was it just a story that was told by others to kind of use Amakusa Shiro and Christianity as an excuse for their own desire to go out with a bang? Was it, a vision he really had, but it wasn't really from Jesus, or it was just, his own mind or something he ate that day? I don't know. Is it enough that the cross is on a banner to call something Christian? Is it enough that there's cathedrals visible in Nagasaki to call Nagasaki more Christian than Hiroshima or something like that? And that raises questions for Christianity here too, I think. To what extent is something Christian just because it has Christian symbols on it, or it references God in certain ways? And is that all it takes to be Christian? I mean, I think the answer to all these questions is no, right? I think there's more to it than that. I think the gospel is something other than simply these symbols or the language of Christianity or something like that. That the gospel is there has to be something more than just that. So I continue to reflect on that. What are the things that, what is seeing the gospel at work today in Japan, which is not something I got to see on this trip, something I'm curious for further learning. Teach us about what the gospel is in our context here in the United States, and also what's not the gospel. Things that maybe we think of as the gospel, a steeple on a church, but they're actually, that's a cultural, European, Western cultural thing that we've attached to Christianity, but it's not the gospel itself, right? We can think of politics that we've attached to the gospel. We can think of songs or styles of worship, or even the idea of having, a worship that lasts for so much time and has a sermon in the middle with some singing. So many of those things, are they essentially Christian? Are they cultural attachments to the gospel? And if so, how do we work within that? And what do we hold as important and essential? And what do we hold more loosely as part of our culture, which doesn't make it bad, but as cultural attachments to the gospel, which are good so far as they serve the gospel, and they're bad so far as they get in the way of the gospel. And I don't know that I know the answer to those things, but I've definitely been finding myself wondering about those things more and more as a result of this trip and the readings and such things that I've done. So that's all that I have for this slideshow. It's the recording's coming in a little under 2 hours, I think, at this point, so it's quite long. So if you've made it this far, congratulations, and I hope you saw something that was interesting to you, and I hope any errors that I may have made in describing things weren't too big. But I was glad to be able to go on this trip, and I'm glad to be able to share it with you all.